Hello, my name is Kevin Vigil, and welcome to Chapter 2 of Playing the Guitar with Your Brain. The topic for this installment is information processing and practice. Let's begin with an information processing model. Look at the very first step in this flowchart, stimuli. Stimuli relates to sensory and somatosensory information. Sensory information usually implies the five senses of vision, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. Since playing the guitar doesn't require the ability to taste or smell, we will only discuss vision, hearing, and touch. Somatosensory information includes touch, but also pain and proprioception. Let's begin with vision. We see with our brains. Light enters through the cornea, then goes through the pupil, and then is refracted in the lens, which reverses and inverts images so that they're upside down and backward. The light rays are then focused on the macula. In the center of the macula is the fovea, which is responsible for visual acuity and color vision. The optic disc and the optic nerve are the axons that will leave the eye. Their retinal ganglion cells will project to the lateral geniculate in the thalamus, which projects to the primary visual cortex, area 17, and secondary areas 18 and 19 in the occipital lobe. These areas will reconstruct an external world and construct a subjective experience of vision. What is fascinating about vision is the way in which images project to the brain. The occipital lobe in the left hemisphere projects to the right side of the visual field in each eye. And the occipital lobe in the right hemisphere projects to the left side of the visual field in each eye. Now, as mentioned before, we see with our brains. And what we see is subjective. For example, look at this famous picture drawn by an anonymous German artist from the late 19th century. What do you see in this picture? If you see a woman's profile, you're correct. But is the woman young or is she old? If you see the young woman, what you think is her chin is the nose of the old woman. The neckline of the young woman is the chin of the old woman. Now, you may want to pause this video for a moment so that you can see both images clearly. But the point is that vision is subjective. Now, let's turn our attention to the sense of hearing, known as the auditory system. In this system, sound waves or pressure waves enter through the external ear, which causes vibration of the eardrum or the tympanic membrane. That vibration is transmitted to the middle ear via three tiny bones that make up the ossicular chain, which focuses acoustic energy into the fluid of the inner ear's cochlea. Within the cochlea is the organ of Corti, and within the organ of Corti is the basilar membrane, which excites the receptive neurons called hair cells. Various points along the basilar membrane are mapped to specific frequencies. High frequencies are at the cochlear base, and low frequencies are located at the cochlear apex. The hair cells then transmit their information to the medulla, then to the medial geniculate, which is in the thalamus, which projects to the primary auditory cortex, area 41 in the temporal lobe, and then to higher order areas 42 and 22 to make meaning of what we hear. Both the visual and auditory systems are involved in processing stimuli outside ourselves. The somatosensory system, however, informs the brain about our own bodies and a world that we can touch. This includes pain and temperature, discriminative touch, or fine touch, and proprioception, which is the awareness of where our limbs are, whether they're moving or not. As you can imagine, fine touch and proprioception are extremely important to guitarists, as is the avoidance of pain. The primary somatosensory cortex is located in areas 3, 1, and 2, with higher order secondary processes taking place in area 7. While we have now identified areas of the brain responsible for various sensory information, it is important to recognize that these abilities do not function in a vacuum. There are many associated areas of the brain that are involved in anything that we do. Consider this. There are approximately 100 billion neurons in the human brain, with 100 trillion connections. Now let's return to our information processing model. Once a person is exposed to stimuli, they may or may not be able to record or remember all of the information of that stimulus immediately. That which is not recorded is lost. So the person may need to be stimulated many times before grasping the full content of the stimulus. Metacognition is a higher order of thought, which includes attention to the stimulus, creating a percept of the stimulus, and eventually responding to the stimulus after having rehearsed the content with short-term or working memory. As is the case with sensory memory, what is recorded in working memory may be lost. An individual can only respond to a stimulus with what is currently in his or her working memory. Working memory, or short-term memory, can be moved into long-term memory with rehearsal, which further encodes the information. Once information is stored in long-term memory, it can be retrieved in order to respond to the task at hand from the working memory. It is also possible to forget what was once in long-term memory, which is often recoverable. This information processing model, which has been designed by cognitive psychologists, may seem to simply make sense to some. Others may have to study this model numerous times in order to grasp full understanding. What is important for the music student is that it's quite normal to go through this process many times in order to master a skill set or even a piece of music. Notice that the word rehearsal appears twice in this model. This highlights the importance of practice. To further emphasize the importance of practice or focused repetition, let's look at some PET scans. PET scans highlight the metabolism of glucose. The red areas in these images represent the locations where glucose is being metabolized. It is important to keep in mind the contralateral relationship between the hemispheres of the brain when looking at these images, meaning that the left hemisphere of the cerebral cortex controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left. These images are from a right-handed person who was tasked to write something with their right hand. Notice the amount of glucose being metabolized on the first trial versus the second. There was some activity in the left hemisphere in the areas involved with motor movement, area 4, in the somatosensory system, areas 1, 2, and 3, and some activity in the visual cortex, area 17. By repeating this activity, the act of rehearsal lessened the amount of glucose being metabolized. Now, let's look at the image that was created by writing with the left hand, this being the non-dominant hand of this particular individual. There's far more glucose being metabolized when using the non-dominant hand. That being said, the act of focused repetition took a complex task and made it easier in the second trial. The implication is that with continued focused repetition, the task will eventually become simple. To demonstrate on the guitar, I'm going to play a simple arpeggio with my right hand. Now, this is a common arpeggio for guitarists, and it's considered relatively simple. But I've been playing this right hand pattern for years, and it's clearly in my long-term memory. Now, I'm going to flip my guitar over and do the same thing with my left hand. I'm only able to play this with a certain level of ease because I've practiced it many times. It's still not as simple for me to do as it is with my right hand, but my brain was able to learn the same task in the non-dominant hemisphere. So whether you're right or left-handed, I encourage you to try this activity on your own and see for yourself how the act of focused practice can improve your abilities. Thanks for watching, and happy practicing.